Welcome to the Boxing Source Podcast, where we go over the latest news in boxing and react to all of the fights that happened in the past week. Now, let's go to our host, J.R. Bell.
All right, we should be here. We should be live. We should be good. What's happening, everybody? The Boxing Source here checking in for February 15th, 2026. Here, we got a number of fights that's coming up here on Saturday, right? And of course, we got the fight on Sunday, or the fight card on Sunday coming up. They're in Detroit, Michigan. But we're going to be talking about a couple of things here in this edition of the Boxing Source Podcast. Shout out to everyone that's able to listen live, whether it's through YouTube or Rumble, and those that'll be listening on the replay. Of course, it'll be available in audio form on Spotify. We got, actually some live boxing that's going on right now. Of course, you got Zuffa Boxing that's happening right now. You do have, of course, the heavyweight bout that is the main event there with Efe Ajagba versus Charles Martin as part of that main event. So, if time permits, we may, talk about that. I don't know if we're going to be live when that fight, actually happens. But, we're going to, chop it up as far as like the boxing talk and everything like that. And if you, have anything to share, just if you're watching live, you could hit the live chat. We'll be able to, I guess, share your thoughts on some of the topics that are going on in the sport of boxing right now. We got, of course, the upcoming fights, as I mentioned there for February 21st, there's, as I was talking about in the past couple of weeks, there's a lot of action that's going on within, my particular area where I'm based at, you know what I mean? So, we got two cards there. One of them, has like a lot of stories behind it, given one particular fighter that would have been involved in that card, but ended up being scratched from that card. As far as I know, I haven't seen any updates on it from that particular point. But we'll kind of like see if we could catch up, with them here in reference to that over the course of the week to see if there's like any updates there when it comes to Ahmad Muhammad Jones, who had posts on social media that he wasn't going to be on the card over in Maryland Live on Saturday, given what's going on between him and his promoter. And we had some conversations there with one of Ahmad Jones' trainers there in Kenny Ellis. Was talking about, hey, they wanted to, have a fight, but have more rounds, added on to the fight and everything like that. But also, there was something going on with the contract there with Ahmad Jones, with the promoter. So it's a crazy, crazy situation there. But, wanted to talk about, of course, the upcoming fight card there in Las Vegas, headlined by the WBC welterweight championship bout, Mario Barrios versus Ryan Garcia. There. Yes, you do have Mario Barrios there as the WBC welterweight champion, making another defense of that belt. We did see that. Yeah, he did have the instance where he went up against Manny Pacquiao last July, and it ended up being a draw. Okay, ended up being a draw, which was the second consecutive draw that he had, right? Because it was something where we had the bout against Manny Pacquiao, that was a draw, and the one before that, that he had against Abel Ramos, that was a draw. So now he's in there with another defense of the WBC welterweight title against Ryan Garcia. Remember, the thing with Mario Barrios was he was the interim WBC champion and then was, as they say, elevated to full champion. But as I mentioned, having two draws there is like, some people think that, he's food. And now it got him matched up here against Ryan Garcia, who's getting yet another opportunity at any type of world title, whether it's an interim title or a full title or what, because remember, they had him fighting Rolly Romero for the interim WBA title last year. And of course, he got knocked down early in that fight and didn't really do much at all and ended up losing by decision to Rolly Romero. Rolly Romero became the WBA welterweight champion. Now, Ryan Garcia, even after all of that, even after the stuff that was going down between him and Devin Haney before that, he's able to have another opportunity to fight for a world title, this time against Mario Barrios. And I've had, of course, conversations with one of the former trainers, but also manager of Mario Barrios and Coach Bob Santos. Who was talking about how he made the decision to have Mario Barrios go in there with Joe Goosen as the head trainer for his bout against Ryan Garcia. Now, we've had some talk as far as like what's going on in the camp, and he's been in camp or getting ready since December. But here we are, we're pretty much like 6 days away from the actual fight. You know that with this being a WBC world title fight, they do have specific weigh-ins on days leading into the bout. You have like a 30-day weigh-in, you have a 14-day weigh-in, you have a 7-day weigh-in, and then of course, what happens before the fight takes place, right? And one of the things that I was kind of like told was that when these weigh-ins, a couple of things have been going on as far as like, are they making it to that percentage? Because you got to be what, like 10% of the weight or the targeted weight on the 10-day weigh-in, the 14-day weigh-in, excuse me, and then 5% of the weight for the 7-day weigh-in. You know what I mean? And that means, like, for example, for 10%, it means you can't like be, what is it? I would say 161 pounds, or like 162 or 163. If you're like over 163 or whatever it is, then you may have to pay a fine. You know what I mean? What or whatnot. Or if you like 5%, when it's like 5%, and when they had a 7-day weigh-in and you're over that 5%, then you got to pay a fine. You know what I mean? So the story goes that one of these fighters was pretty much like hovering above, that 5%, going into the 7-day weigh-in. But it was like more going into that, even with the 14-day weigh-in. Real quick, shout out to those in the live chat, checking in. You got Z Pacino in the building. My guy L Dub is in the building. What's going on? So we had the whole thing as far as like the weights and stuff like that. So I think that a number of people are concerned about how either fighter is actually approaching this. Of course, you have the whole backstory with Ryan Garcia and given his past stuff as far as like testing positive for illegal substances and things like that. Now he's going into this bout in a world championship bout, a WBC world championship bout, which of course is kind of like tied to the whole thing with the clean boxing program and participating with VADA. You know what I mean? So now you got VADA all in this, CBP, that type of stuff. So when it comes to Ryan Garcia, of course they're gonna have the little what do I say, microscope when it comes to Ryan Garcia and things like that. But also, with Mario Barrios, he's been there at 147 for, some time now. Of course, he was coming from 140, had a world title there at 140 before moving to 147, having the fights against the Keith Thurman, the Yordenis Ugas, Fabian Maidanas, and I mentioned his bouts with Abel Ramos and Manny Pacquiao. So he's, still there competing at the 147-pound division at 30 years old. You know what I mean? So now it's like, hey, once you kind of like reach that age, you do know that it kind of is a little bit of a struggle to get down that weight, in comparison to like when you're 22 or 23 or 24. You know what I mean? So with that being said, now we look ahead to this bout here for that WBC welterweight championship. I've kind of like heard that the thing with what is it with Goosen is that if need be, he'll have his fighter working up until it's time for the weigh-in or something like that. You know what I mean? But for me, that's not necessarily a rare in a sense when it comes to fighters, especially when you have to, I guess, get to, a weight or something like that. You know what I mean? Because if you're trying to, for example, make weight, sometimes you have to, do a few things, whether it's 3 days out or 2 days out in order to make that weight. It happens. That's boxing. So I want to see like how that goes. Word on the street is that as far as like fight week, I don't know if anyone has received any information about fight week, and how you have the schedule of events and stuff like that. Of course, when you have the press conference, you'll have the whole thing with the win, and you have the whole thing with the fight. But sometimes depending on the event, you could have like a public workout or something like that. You know what I mean? So, that's going to be something that I'm going to be looking for if they're going to have a public workout. And if they do, will it have something that'll involve the main event fighters, or if it'll just be like the undercard and then they promote the undercard or something like that. You know what I mean? So, I'll be looking for that when it comes to the main event fighters here for Ryan Garcia and Mario Barrios. I think that it's going to be one of those, I guess, top stories when it comes to fight week. They're going into February 21st. Now, again, that is for that WBC welterweight championship, and of course, you have like a number of super lightweight championship bouts that's going to be on the line in that fight card. Of course, with Richard Hitchens versus Oscar Duarte, and with Gary Antoine Russell versus Andy Hirooka there for that WBA super lightweight title. We also have Joshua Edwards that's going to be involved in this fight card there at heavyweight. You got Amari Jones that's going to be involved in this fight card against Luis Arias. You got Beck Melikuziev there against Sanak Beko. That's on that fight card, and Frank Martin versus Nahir Albright, which a number of people feel like that particular fight is going to be the one to like watch out for there, as that is also at 140 pounds. And of course, Nahir Albright had the win against Kelvin Davis in Norfolk last summer. So we got to see how that fight shapes up and turns out there for February 21st. But as it was mentioned there, I like to see how this fight goes here for that WBC welterweight championship. Yes, we did have a conversation with the WBC president Mauricio Suleiman some time back, and he did kind of like mention what was going on with the WBC welterweight championship fight. But kind of like is something to look forward to, because again, you have Mario Barrios with that WBC welterweight championship, and Ryan Garcia is there, and it's almost like, hey, we have Manny Pacquiao there with him being the name, and then you have Ryan Garcia here, being the name that it's almost like they're trying to get the title off of Mario Barrios, because it's like, hey, if you had Manny Pacquiao winning it, folks are talking about, oh my God, look at how many potential bouts we could have with Manny Pacquiao, as a world champion, And then here now with Ryan Garcia, it's like, oh my God, look at how many, potential fights that we could have with Ryan Garcia as a world champion. We could have a rematch with Devin Haney. We could have a, against I don't even know, like, Keyshawn Davis, who knows? Which I'll mention Keyshawn here in a bit, or like a Shakur Stevenson or something. Like, it's like fans were talking about a lot of potential fights that could happen if Ryan Garcia defeats Mario Barrios. But not that many people are talking about what fights could happen if Mario Barrios beats Ryan Garcia. And even with when I first heard about this bout being announced, I'm like, you know what? I see it being Mario Barrios winning the fight. But after these last couple of weeks, it's like there's like some uncertainty going on in between both fighters. I would say so I'm not sure like how things would kind of like go there for this upcoming bout. Now, I would say in a few days, when it gets closer to actual fight day, we'll kind of like go through the tail of the tape, keys to victory, that type of stuff when it comes to that particular bout. But as of right now, given that what it'll be like, maybe within the next couple of days, you'll have both fighters, I guess, have grand arrivals or whatever it is, if they're not in Las Vegas already. You know what I'm saying? So I want to see like how that turns out, how the condition of both Mario Barrios and Ryan Garcia is going into this particular bout. So it's something to look forward to here, as there's like a lot on the line there in this particular bout, given the whole state of the welterweight division. I mentioned there with, Devin Haney as the WBO welterweight champion, and of course with, Mario Barrios there defending the WBC belt. You got Rolly Romero there with the WBA, who still doesn't have a bout yet. That's the crazy part. That Rolly Romero don't have a bout yet, and we're pretty much getting to about a year until he's actually defending that world title. And of course, you got Lewis Crocker there as the IBF champion. And he's able to. He'll probably be able to have like one defense here before they kind of like call it mandatory or something like that. If I'm not mistaken. You got Liam Paro there in action there, where he's supposed to be facing somebody there within an eliminator bout or something like that. So they probably gotta have to set that up there for the IBF, right? But kind of like tells you what the whole thing is with the welterweight situation, with Devin Haney kind of like seeing as he might be the top rated fighter at 147 pounds, even though Mario Barrios has been I guess, the longest reigning world champion there in the welterweight division. But again, Barrios has the two draws while being a world champion, while Devin Haney was able to defeat Brian Norman Jr. for that WBO belt. So that's kind of like how that shapes itself out on that front. You know what I mean? Now, other thing that I wanted to talk about here on this joint here, I might revisit the card there for February 21st in Las Vegas. But we also kind of like seen some. I guess it's part of his channel and everything like that. Former WBO lightweight champion Keyshawn Davis. I forgot if he like officially changed his nickname from the businessman to like something else. But going stemming off from his win against Jamaine Ortiz on January 31st, part of Ring 6, he pretty much like had called out Devin Miles Haney, of course, WBO welterweight champion. And I'm like, well, what is he doing? The same thing that Devin Haney's doing, is like having a brief stint as a world champion at 135. Well, Devin Haney, did hold a WBC belt before becoming officially the undisputed champion at 135. But for Keyshawn Davis, after winning the WBO lightweight title, he didn't even have one fight before vacating that WBO lightweight title. Now he gets back in the ring. He's there at the 140-pound division against Jamaine Ortiz. That's supposed to be a WBO eliminator bout. He's ranked at number one in the WBO at 140, and yet he's already, talking about fighting Devin Haney at 147. And I'm like, hey, you want to call out Devin Haney, Deebo? Hey, oh, okay, there it is. Shout out my guy Cap Quest in the building, man. Yeah, the amazing Keyshawn Davis. That's right. That's what it is. The amazing Keyshawn Davis. Yeah, that's what he's kind of going by right now. But Keyshawn is saying that, okay, if they gonna call Devin Deebo Haney, well, I'm Craig. He basically saying like, I got bricks in these hands. So he's saying like, hey, he will want that smoke with Devin Haney. Now, listen, I don't know what it is about the 140-pound division, but it seems like a number of these fighters aren't even, staying that long to, compete at the 140-pound division. It's almost like, hey, yeah, they're at 135, and then having to stop at 140. I'm going to 147. I don't understand it. Over the past like what 15, 20, probably 25 years, who knows? But 147 has been like viewed as a glamour division in boxing, you know. But right now, I think in this state of boxing, you really don't have to, be part of a specific division in order to, make the money that you may look for. You know, you don't have to be like in the middleweight division. You don't have to be in the welterweight division. You don't have to necessarily be in the lightweight division. You should be able to just make your name where you're at and see if you can make the fights regardless of what the weight class is. You know what I'm saying? So, that's why I'm like, well, if you competing in 140, like Keyshawn is, well, basically at this point, then why not make those fights that could happen in 140? I talked about two world title fights that's going to be taking place on February 21st. Right now, if the defending champions end up winning those bouts, you could have either a unification bout with those two. Of course, they have a newly crowned world champion there in Shakur Stevenson. With the WBO, right? But I just don't understand, like, how come you can't make those big fights regardless of the weight class? You I think he also mentioned when it comes to Keyshawn Davis that he could, potentially be interested in a fight against WBC champion Dalton Smith. Now, I wouldn't have any issues with that, but of course, technicalities and everything when it comes to some of these fights or some of these fighters, and of course, when I had the conversation with Mauricio Soleiman, I did confirm the whole thing in reference to the 140-pound champion Dalton Smith, who defeated Subriel Matias. Dalton Smith was a mandatory challenger, but the WBC had made that ruling in reference to Matias and former champion Alberto Puello. So Alberto Puello was still like the next in line for that world championship. So for Dalton Smith, that's going to be his next fight there as far as like his first defense as a WBC champ. But still, you got a lot of fighters that are out there, that have competed, former world champions, top contenders out there at 140. As some have said, like 140 should be like one of the deepest divisions that we have in boxing right now. It's at least to me, it's much better as far as like the depth than 147 is at this point. So why not go ahead and mix and match and have a number of these fights happening at 140 pounds? That's why I say, like, what's going on Saturday, with 3 fights there at 140, those are like really, really good matchups that you got at 140 pounds. Why not go ahead and continue that later this year, having, some of the winners be involved? How about this? Check it. There was some time back, with me mentioning Keyshawn Davis, right? There's some time back that we could have potentially had a rematch between Keyshawn Davis and Nahir Albright before they lined up Keyshawn to face Jamaine Ortiz, right? Okay. You won your fight against Jamaine Ortiz. Nahir Albright is going up against Frank Martin. I think some of y'all fight fans remember when Keyshawn Davis and Frank Martin had a verbal, exchange. How Keyshawn Davis and Richardson Hitchens had a verbal exchange, in December of last year, right? So why not go ahead and say, hey, I could stay at 140 pounds and get me the winner of Frank Martin versus Nahir Albright. That would be a great fight right there. You know what I mean? That would gonna be a good fight right there. And yeah, my guy Capcoy says, hey, Keyshawn gonna have to see Frank Martin after Saturday. And he got Frank Martin, over Nahir Albright. But hey, like I said, regardless of who wins that fight, Keyshawn should go up against, one of those guys. Like, you had these verbal, confrontations with Richardson Hitchens, who's the IBF champ. You had, a little verbal spat with Frank Martin some time back. You had the bout against Nahir Albright that ended up being a no contest, due to the Texas State Athletic Commission and getting all, you feel me? So yeah, so I'm like, why not have one of those opponents there as the next guy? At least to me, I'm like saying, why not go ahead and have that? You know, what some people they want to play matchmaker and things like that. So let's see. I'll do this. Let's have what's going on February 21st, right? And it goes down. And I'll put it like this. I'll give credence here to cat question building, right? Let's say you got Frank Martin winning against Nahir Albright. Then later this year, we should see Keyshawn Davis versus Frank Martin. All right. And then let's have the world champions make their defenses of their world title. So that means Gary Antoine Russell beats Andy Hirioka. And you got Richard Hitchens, beating Oscar Duarte. So you're going to have the IBF and the WBA champions. Then let's have them go up against each other later this year. All right. So you will have two firefights at 140 later this year. Let's say by the end of the summer, like July or maybe August, we'll have those two fights, right? And then we get to see what's up with Shakur Stevenson, because if you're gonna have Keyshawn Davis there at number one, and you know that the whole thing with the mandatory status thing changes with the new champion, especially since Teofimo Lopez was the super champion, so he ain't had to worry about a mandatory for another 12 months if he had won that fight against Shakur Stevenson. Now that whole mandatory thing is reset, and now you got to wait until 12 months. So have Shakur Stevenson make a voluntary defense of that WBO title. He could, I don't know, go up against Ernesto Mercado or somebody like that, or get somebody that could face him. Now I don't know about the whole situation with Teofimo and the WBO, but if that was a voluntary defense, and if Teo feels like he was really really off, then maybe you could go for a rematch. Then Teofimo Lopez, I doubt it, but I mean if the option's there, why not try to go for it? But I still doubt it. But hey, I just gave y'all some good fights right there, right? Like Shakur Stevenson, Teofimo Lopez rematch. If they win their title defenses, Richard Hitchens versus Gary Antoine Russell, and then Keyshawn Davis versus Frank Martin. That would be a firefight card right there. Just with those three fights, that would be a firefight card. But again, we still got to see what happens on February 21st to see if what I was talking about actually goes down. But the thing there, like I said with Keyshawn, calling out Dev, I'm like, yeah, I'm not necessarily into those type of fights, because it's not something that we are necessarily calling for, or at least fight fans are calling for. You know what I mean? Like even with Shakur Stevenson talking about fighting Conor Benn. Like we just seen Shakur Stevenson as the WBC champion at 135 pounds. He has one fight against Teofimo Lopez, and then now he's talking about fighting Conor Benn. Yeah, I know they've had conversations between each other in the past, but come on. Conor Benn was competing at 160 pounds or so against Chris Eubank Jr. Now y'all are saying that, okay, he's going to go back down to 147, which Conor Benn hasn't really competed at 147 pounds in over 2 years? Right? Against a Pete Dobson? What's the point of Conor Benn competing at 147 pounds against someone like Shakur Stevenson? Who was requesting that? Who was saying, hey, oh my God, That's the fight I want to see. Shakur Stevenson versus Conor Ben. Like who's really like clamoring for a fight of that magnitude? For what? You know what I'm saying? So at least for me, right? If y'all had like the three fights basically that I mentioned, or Shakur Stevenson and a voluntary defense of that WBO title, I wouldn't have any issues with that if that happened later this year. But for Keyshawn, going up against Dev Haney at 147, while it may, seem like it's interesting given that, both fighters have been competing around the same weight class, for some time, I'm like, do we really want that fight? That's the question. Do fight fans want to see Keyshawn Davis versus Devin Haney right now? Do we want to see it? Man, I don't know. I don't know. Hopefully, fight fans, y'all can help me out if y'all are, asking for a fight like that. But all of these, mix and match and having fighters fight in different weight classes and all that type of stuff. I mean, I'm call me like, speaking of Teofimo Lopez, hey, they actually showed Teofimo out there for the Zuffa Boxing thing that's going on right now. You know what I mean? So he's out there in Vegas or whatever. But yeah, I'm not really, into all of this mix and match stuff of having fighters from different divisions fighting each other. Just make the best fights possible within that weight class, and we'll be good. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm looking at, for that. Right now, what else is out there? I know we had the whole thing as far as like an announcement with Tyson Fury and Arslan Bekmambetov that's going to be there in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. That's the venue for it. That's going to be on Netflix April 11th. We know about the Chisora versus Wilder. That's going to be on April 4th. We got Fabio Wardley versus Daniel Dubois. That's supposed to be in May for the WBO heavyweight title. So I'm like, we got all of this stuff going on in the heavyweight division, but we don't have anything involving the unified heavyweight champion Alexander Usyk. Wait a minute. Remember when we had the whole stuff going on in reference to an announcement for IVB boxing or whatever it is, right? That they had a big announcement that they're going to say about having this event. It's going to be in San Francisco, and they'll have like 110,000 people and all that type of stuff, and that they could potentially have Alexander Usyk involved in it. And then when they had the announcement, it didn't mention Alexander Usyk. Now you're going to have like something where Alexander Usyk could potentially fight a mixed martial arts fighter or something. I heard like, I don't even know. I forgot who the dude's name was. I'm like, where's all this stuff coming from? Where is all this coming from? To be honest with you, I don't know. But what it says though, when it comes to Alexander Usyk, is that you're a unified champion. You basically were the undisputed champion, two-time undisputed champion, and well, all of these other heavyweight fighters are getting fights or having fights, but you can't line up a fight with anybody. So it's like being a unified champion, and yet you can't figure out who to fight, who would line up to face you or something like that, where it would kind of like make sense. The thing is like Alexander Usyk, having his fights against Anthony Joshua, having his fights against Tyson Fury, had the fights against Daniel Dubois. All of those are basically, as they say, road fights. But he still got paid a handsome amount of money for all of those fights. Now that just says, hey, in order for me to get out of bed, so to speak, and to step in the gym to prepare for a fight, this is how much you're going to have to pay me. And with Alexander Usyk, it's not like, he's, based in the UK, or he's based in the US, or, even with the whole joint, what we recently saw there with the WBC interim champ and Age Cabio over in Germany, like he don't even have like a home crowd like that. So you can't pretty much like say, hey, he could go here, he could have fights here on a regular basis, and you're gonna get a strong crowd or a great crowd that's gonna be paying some good money to see him fight. No, you're not getting that. So that's my thing then with Alexander Usyk. Now, who is Usyk going to fight? I don't even know. Like I don't even know. You ain't gonna have him. Like I said, Fabio Wardley got somebody. Cabio just had a fight, and it's gonna be like another 5 or 6 months or so before he's gonna be able to fight. So who are they gonna line him up to fight? It ain't gonna be Moses Atama because Atama got his fight coming up in March. So who is out there for him to fight? Zhilei Zhang? What are they gonna do? Have him fight Zhilei Zhang in China? Come on. Again, that would be the only thing. Unless they could have that IV boxing or whatever it is, and then it'll be Alexander Usyk versus Zhilei Zhang over in San Francisco. Now, that potentially could generate a lot of people to go and see that fight. But again, it's still like Alexander Usyk versus Zhilei Zhang. That's not going to, wow fight fans, all across the world or whatever it is. I just don't see it. So I don't even know like how that's gonna work itself out. You know what I mean? So you do have that. What else would I be talking about? Because I'm just going through a lot of these topics here, like really quick. I ain't even like 40 minutes in this podcast, and I done talked about a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of topics. You know what I'm saying? But shout out to everyone that's listening live, watching live. Support by hitting the like button on the YouTube. Those on Rumble, you can support by pitching in. We got what is it? The Cash App, the Boxing Source. If you want to contribute to the movement, and hit the subscribe button. Also, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. We're on TikTok. We got we're putting up videos, shorts on TikTok as well, so you can follow us on TikTok too. But like I said, I mean, I kind of went through a whole lot of topics here already. Now, I know that there's some people that are talking about a recent interview that did take place with my guy Najee and by Cigar Talk, excuse me, and former WBC, WBO, WBA, IBF super welterweight champion Jermell Charlo. And yeah, I am watching the Zuffa Boxing. A guy that like here, like I said, I mean, I'm kind of like waiting out to see, when they do have the fight, of course, with Charles Martin and Efe Ajagba, but that's probably going to be, around like 9 p.m. Eastern time or something like that. I'm going to probably be done, by this, done with the podcast by then. You feel me? But yeah, I wanted to go back to that whole thing there with Jermell Charlo. There's a number of things there that have been, talked about or brought up in that. A couple of major topics, so to speak. A lot of people are kind of like curious to see when Jermell Charlo does get back in the ring. We haven't seen Jermell Charlo in the ring since his bout against Santos Saul Alvarez Barragan in Las Vegas for the undisputed super middleweight titles at the time. There had been, of course, like posts on social media some time back, from Jermell Charlo saying that, hey, he will want smoke with, Sebastian Fundora, Jerome Sinis, Virgil Ortiz, Errol Spence, all that type of stuff, right? Couple things. One, he did kind of like mention this whole thing with him and Errol Spence and that, he has some type of up and down, relationship with Errol Spence. And Errol Spence did have some comments about Jermell Charlo. The other, what was it, like a few days ago? When Errol Spence was part of a event that took place in Texas, and Errol Spence was like saying, "Hey man, hey, Jamel Charlo knows what was going on in the sparring sessions, man. You know what I mean? So I guess Jamel Charlo had to, respond to that, so to speak. Um, and he had some comments in reference to their relationship over the years, which is kind of like funny or interesting because I think what was it? My guy Hans Demostode, there, who kind of like made a post on social media that was a little bit of a clip that of interview with Jamel Charlo with Errol Spence there. I think it was on like Fight Hub TV some years back. And it was Jamel Charlo talk about, hey, this my dog, this my, my road dog, everything like that, best friend, all that type of stuff. And then now here we are years later, and he's, talking, what he's talking, right? That's one interesting part of that interview. The other one that I, that stood out to me that I couldn't believe was that he was mentioning one instance where he was in a fight and he was there in the corner with his former trainer at the time, Ronnie Shields. And that, Ronnie kind of you know what, man, I should let me see, man. Should I go back to this? I'm gonna see if I can go back to it. All right. Let me see if I can go back to it, man. Because I I was kind of taken back by it. You know what I mean? I was kind of taken back by it because that was funny that he was saying stuff about what Ronnie Shields was doing, there, in the ring or during the fight. And I'm like, bro, like what are you doing, man? What are you doing, yo? This is like not necessarily cool. You know what I'm saying? So let me see if I could go ahead and see if I could find the clip, man, because I wanted to see if I could find it. Because he was talking about there being with Ronnie Shields and stuff like that. And the thing is, of course, we had like the weekly show with Coach Ronnie Shields. They're on the War Week Boxing channel, right? So you know what? All right. Like I said, shout out to Unbiased Box. I'm gonna see if I can share this on the screen there, man. Hey, what's up, BVO? And he says, "Hey, look, listen, BVO. It's like I said before. You got to understand. You see, you know, I got things, where I'm able to work things out and get the highest payday. You see, because I'm TBE, and it don't matter who I fight. I could fight, the neighborhood drunkard, and I'll get a bunch of money. Listen, I could fight, the dean at an elementary school and get a bunch of money because everybody's there. They want to see me. They don't care what it is, who it is. They want to see me fight. And you know what? You know what else? You know what else? My thing is this. The thing is this. You could call out anybody, that's step in the ring with me. I don't care if it's Mike Tyson. I don't care if it's Jake Paul. I don't care if it's Terrence Crawford. I don't care if it's Errol Spence. Listen, they can't touch me. All right, so there you go, right? All right, so now I'm gonna see if I could go ahead and cue this clip up. Shout out to Unbiased Box here, that was able to reference what's going on or what's going down there with Cigar Talk, of course. And the thing is too with Najee, he was on what was it on TV? He was able to cover some things there. So all right, let me see here. We got like a 34-second clip here. Let's run it.
Like this and this. Hey, let's go. You losing this round. Let's fucking fight. I didn't have no enthuse, and I got rid of Ronnie because Ronnie slapped me one time in the corner. Yeah. I never liked no shit like that. You don't ever do your...
That's like old school.
Yeah. I'm not with all that. Yeah. Right? We're going to stay with this shit. So then motherfucker slapped me, Shit, I might have needed to be slapped during that moment.
Back then.
You know?
Wake up.
But Guzman is all of that by himself. He speaks multiple languages. He's just.
All right, that's just part of it. That's just part of it, right? Like I said, I mean, we have the weekly show there with Coach Ronnie Shields. Now I'm gonna see if I hit him up tomorrow because again, Joshua Edwards is gonna be on that fight card in Las Vegas on February 21st. So I'm not sure if Coach Ronnie will be heading to Vegas by then. But if not, then we're gonna see about getting a show on with Coach Ronnie Shields too, because I think we need to get some type of response, to all of that. Which and the thing is, it's like really interesting there, because you got Jamel Charlo, they had like a brief stint there with Ronnie Shields, but you currently have Jamal Charlo back with Coach Ronnie Shields now. And so having this is kind of funny, but you also had a whole joint there where Jamel Charlo at least in that little segment there of the interview with Najee of Cigar Talk about Juan Guzman, who has kind of like been the chief second there for Jamel Charlo for some time. I mean, if y'all seen him out there, with when Jamel Charlo won the undisputed super welterweight title, at the time when he had that stoppage victory over Brian Carlos Castaño over in California, so it was very interesting to like see this here, but hey, y'all haven't done so already. Y'all gonna have to watch this particular interview, man, because it's probably one of the craziest interviews that that's been out for some time, man. So that's kind of something there that we'll have to be on the lookout for, because listen, we need like we need Jamel Charlo back in the ring, man. We need Jamel Charlo back in the ring somehow, some way. We need Jamel Charlo back in the ring because like to have somebody like that be able to push for a fight to happen, or try to go after a number of these guys, as he was mentioning there within the 154-pound division. It just shows like how much he could potentially generate for a fight. Of course, he was talking about the thing there with Errol Spence. A lot of people want to see if Errol Spence can get back in the ring. You know what I mean? You talk about the part with Jerome Boots Ennis, which I'm gonna go ahead and kind of like talk about that here in a little bit. And I said that he will want to smoke with a number of these other fighters at 154. I mentioned all of the fights that could be made at 140 pounds. You see all the fights that could be made here at 154 pounds. And that includes BVO's least favorite fighter, Jerome Boots Ennis. But that's a whole nother story there, right? With that. Now, when I talk about this thing here in 154 and Boots Ennis, people are still like saying, hey, maybe he could still get this fight here with Virgil Ortiz Jr. And I said weeks ago, when you had that initial lawsuit that Virgil Ortiz Jr. had against Oscar and Golden Boy Promotions, I said once that was out in public, I said there's pretty much little to no chance that we were going to have Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. next. Not while you had this whole little conflict of the contract between Virgil Ortiz Jr. and Golden Boy Promotions. Now we have this whole thing with the countersuit going on with Golden Boy and Virgil Ortiz Jr. and Rick Meridian. So as far as like Virgil Ortiz Jr. is concerned, I'd be surprised if he even has like any type of fight lined up anytime soon. And I'm talking about within the next few months. I'd be surprised. And listen, they have some type of settlement deal or whatever it is, then I just don't see Virgil Ortiz Jr. having a fight with anybody anytime soon. So with that being said, that leaves Ron Boot Sentence out there, you're potentially looking for a fight. I mean, yeah, we do have the whole thing with Josh Kelly that has pretty much Matchroom Boxing has like the rights for his next fight. Yes, it did mention there on the Boxing Source Midweek report that the new unified champion in Xander Zayas is interested in making a fight there with Josh Kelly. But outside of that, I don't see like what else could basically be out there for Boot Sentence, unless if they like say, hey, we'll get him a fight that's either in Philadelphia. Now I've heard like Atlanta or something like that. But as far as like fighting one of those world champions, highly unlikely that's happening next. Highly unlikely that's happening next unless he's willing to sit out a few more months. Now, that's going to be another question. Would we see Boot Sentence in a fight within these next couple of months, or do you see him waiting it out until the early summer, probably by mid-June, to see if he could get a fight with one of the world champions? Y'all think that we could have a 5-month turnaround for one of those world champions to go ahead and face Boot Sentence next? Because again, you had both Josh Kelly have his win against Bakamurda Zaliev on January 31st. You had Xander Zayas in his win against Abbas Barao on January 31st. They're not getting back in the ring in like May. That's not happening. So are we going to see it to where they could wait it out and then have a fight with Boot Sentence in June or July or something like that? Or are we going to see Boot Sentence in a bout by April? Now, if we do see Boot Sentence in a bout by April, then you're not going to see him back in the ring again until what? September, October? So we'll see, man. He says, shout out to Bull Rider in the building on the chat. He asks, do you think De La Hoya breached his contract with Virgil Ortiz? That's like one of the big conflicts that they have when it comes to this lawsuit. And that's what both parties are challenging, right? Because Virgil Ortiz is saying that y'all had an agreement with us that was contingent on the deal that Golden Boy has with the Zone. That's one. The second thing that stood out when I talked about this some time back was that Golden Boy Promotions was under an obligation to provide at least 2 bouts for Virgil Ortiz Jr. per, I guess, contract year, so to speak, right? So that was pretty much like in place after Virgil Ortiz had his bout for that WBC interim title, right? So when Virgil Ortiz won that bout and got that win to become the interim champion, right? His contract pretty much went up, so to speak, right? So not April, but August of 2024, before his bout against Sergey Boachuk, he was getting paid a minimum of like $1 to $1.5 million, right? Or something like that. When he had his fight against Sergey Boachuk, if you won and become a WBC interim champion, that means after that, his minimum purse was $2 million. Okay, so every fight that he has after that, while being the WBC interim champion, is at minimum $2 million. So with him winning that bout, $2 million for his next bout. That's one. Two, they had to basically get him 2 bouts within that year before his bout against Boachuk. So when he had Sergey Boachuk, and then when he had the bout against Israel Madrimov, that was basically that year that Golden Boy, honored that part of the contract. Then in his next year, that started in August of last year, like pretty much before August 10th of last year, they said how to provide 2 fights for him before August of 2026. His first one is against Erickson Lubin. Okay, so they still had another series of months before they could provide him or offer him a fight or have him locked in for a fight, before August 2026. So, yeah, they could offer something there with the Boots Ennis fight, but another thing that they challenged it on was that he was supposed to have two other options for a fight outside of Boots Ennis. So that's one. And then two was the thing, as it was mentioned there, with the DAZN contract with Golden Boy Promotions. And that at the time when the lawsuit was, raised, that Golden Boy was under, negotiations to see if they could renew for 2026, 2027. So Golden Boy kind of said, hey, we got this. This is what's going on here with DAZN right now. So we're not necessarily like completely signed, but we still had this provisional agreement. And with that provisional agreement, they're just using that as saying like, hey, we still working with DAZN, so you can't use this against us. And that's why you had, like, for example, with the DAZN event that happened in January, that was under Golden Boy Promotions. It's like, okay, if Golden Boy is able to have this event on DAZN that was on a Friday, then maybe they could just use that. Is it a long-term deal? No. Is it provisional? Yeah. But they're just using that as saying like, hey, we got this provisional deal with DAZN, so it's not like we're completely gone from DAZN. We still have this. So, like I said, that whole back and forth between Golden Boy Promotions, Virgil Ortiz Jr., and Rick Meridian, since Golden Boy, kind of like sued Rick Meridian, it's going to be a crazy situation. You know what I mean? That whole joint where they posted on that original lawsuit where the response to Virgil Ortiz and this party saying that Virgil Ortiz and Meridian or whatever it is requested a minimum of $7 million for the fight against Boots Ennis. Y'all leave that up to, whatever. Y'all leave it up to judgment within y'all. If y'all feel like Virgil Ortiz Jr. should get $7 million to face Boots Ennis, I mean, hey, but that's what they turned in to the to California Supreme Court or whatever it was, saying that, hey, they want around $7 million for the fight against Boots Ennis. And you still have them, as of right now, I don't even know if they scheduled the court date for it yet. So as long as that's still going on, Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz, unless we get something from, sources, some of them pretty much direct, I just don't see that fight happening. All right. So yeah, that's what I got on that front. Again, we got a number of fights here to look forward to coming up this weekend. Right now, of course, we got that whole thing with Zuffa Boxing going on. So that is, the main thing happening right now. As I said, with the fight card over in Las Vegas is happening. We probably had like another series of events that are going on February 21st. Like I said, we have some in the area. I will be, seeing if I could talk about that on the Boxing Source midweek report on Wednesday, because it's gonna be, I think the midweek report will be, stacked because we're gonna have a lot of fights that we're gonna cover on that one, including the fight card on February 22nd in Detroit. You do have that rematch with Clarissa Shields versus Franchon Cruz DAZN, right? We also, had that conversation with the fighter that's going to be on that card on the 22nd. Okay. So if y'all be able to, catch up with us on that one, because, we're supposed to, have Price Taylor there in the in that fight card. He's going up against James Evans. No, not the James Evans from Good Times, nothing like that. But you're gonna have Price Taylor back in the mix here. We had his last bout against Michael Polite Coffey. There was able to get a decision win on that, so now he's back in the mix. Of course, he was part of what was formerly Team Combat League, but it's now Team Boxing League. So You're going to see Price Taylor on there. You're going to also see Atif Overton on there, recent signee for Salida Promotions. You're going to have a number of other fights there to kind of like look forward to, but of course, headlined by the heavyweight title fight with Clarissa Shields and Franchon Cruz-Azurn. And the thing is, man, I was hoping that I could catch up with Franchon before fight week, because one of the big stories with that is Franchon. This is supposed to be like a rematch between these two. It was the first pro bout was these two, coming out of the Olympics. And here we are in 2026, and this is a rematch. And you got, of course, Franchon is a unified champion there at super middleweight. And you got, what was going on with Clarissa Shields and their new, deal and whatnot. But it's almost like, they're treating Franchon Cruz like she's just any type of opponent. It's nasty work. Another question here. Can a fight between Boots and Xander be realistic? Good question. It should be. But it's like, I think I kind of mentioned this before. When it comes to Xander Zayas, right? He's a unified champion. They were able to get him a bout against Abbas Barao for the WBO and WBA titles, right? But when you don't necessarily have a lucrative network deal as a promotional company, then it kind of like limits what your fighters can do or limits what your fighters can earn, potentially. So with Xander, yes, he gets to win over Abbas Barao and is a unified champion. Yes, it was a fairly successful bout out there in Puerto Rico on January 31st. But like, if you would have had this thing here with with Xander Zayas and winning the unified titles in his top rank, he was supposed to be like they were building up Xander Zayas to get to this particular point. But thinking how he was able to win the WBO title, and it was the last bout that Top Rank had under the ESPN deal. And y'all seen how lucrative that deal was with ESPN. But you're talking about one of probably the most storied promotional company in boxing, and you can't have them, and they are not currently on a major outlet there for sports in the U.S. Like, if y'all know in the past how Top Rank built up a lot of fighters like a Tito Trinidad, a Oscar De La Hoya, a Floyd Mayweather when they had him, Miguel Cotto or something like that, Manny Pacquiao, all of that, Terrence Crawford up to a point. Xander Zayas could have been someone that would have been the next in line to be that next star potentially that they could build towards. And one of the things that I mentioned there was, hey, with Xander Zayas, after this fight against Abbas Barao, man, it would have been like automatic to have him be the headliner for Madison Square Garden, Puerto Rican Day Parade weekend. Just like how they had Miguel Cotto. But is it still possible? I don't know. I was saying that it could be possible against someone like a Josh Kelly, maybe. But, we'll see, man. Again, Josh Kelly has that whole thing worked out with Matchroom, so we'll see. What's going on here, man? I hate how YouTube, you can't even necessarily see these things because it kind of like has it to where they don't have the actual username on there. They just have like what their sign up name is. It's crazy, man. So shout out to Otitani there on this thing here, live on the Boxing Source podcast. You feel me? All right. So, but yeah, that was my thing in reference to like Boots and Xander, is that with the whole uncertainty with Top Rank, I don't know what they could do with Xander. I'd say like you would think with him winning those 2 world titles that it would be automatic. You know what I mean? That they could have him headline a bout over in New York City, Madison Square Garden. not the theater at Madison Square Garden, like his previous bout, that he had there against Jorge Garcia Perez. Well, I'm talking about the full-fledged garden. All right, that would have been the best scenario for Xander Zayas, headlining Madison Square Garden, having a first defense of the unified titles against a Josh Kelly or something like that. Against Boots, probably wouldn't be in Madison Square Garden like that unless somebody else is able to, pitch in, so to speak. So you do have that on that front. All right. But that's mainly what I had here in this edition of the Boxing Source podcast. Shout out to everyone that's been able to listen live here, whether it's on YouTube or Rumble. Of course, it's going to be available, for y'all to go back and play and all that type of stuff on YouTube and Rumble. We're going to have, those things there for Spotify. We're going to have it available on Spotify. Let's see here. But before I roll out, shout out to Gorgio in the building. He says, hey, I don't mind watching the fights on their channel, their Top Rank Classics on Tubi. Is it bad that they show it there? Okay. Here, the thing about it is that with it being on that particular channel, like who's able to basically fund it, so to speak, right? So I'll put in an example, right? Like how things kind of work in boxing, because like I said, this whole business thing is one of the things that I talk about here, on these podcasts and stuff like that. Like we talk about the fights, but we also talk about the business. Now, when it comes to like having main events or whatever it is, right? You can have a fight that's put out there and say that one fighter that could, have a deal with the network, okay, and they say they'll headline a bout against a certain opponent. They say, hey, we got this fight right here where this guy is going to fight another guy. How much you willing to put up for it? The network will say, hey, okay, we only got this for it. Or they'll say, hey, we ain't cool with that. We want something else. So if they say, hey, we ain't cool with it, we want something else, then the promotional company has to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, we got to look for another opponent. Or if they say, or if the network says, hey, we got this opponent here that we suggest that he fights, either y'all do it or we just ain't gonna, roll with it, or we ain't gonna put it up. Then that's kind of like how it goes, So the thing is with Tubi, right? Like, for example, with what you had with Xander Zayas versus Abbas Barao, that was like one example of where, if I can, go ahead and look it up real quick, right? That, yeah, it does show like it's Top Rank that was like behind it. But the thing about it is like, how are you going to, put up so much money, behind all of that? Let me see here, because all right, we'll go a little bit over on this here, because I wanted to kind of like go into this a little bit here. Shout out to Gorgior in this, but what I want to do is I want to show what we had for January 31st, right? Okay, so you kind of like see here, it should be shown here. All right, it says the fight card that was out there. Okay, yeah, Puerto Rico Boxing Commission, all that type of stuff. You do see Bob Arum, you do see Brad Goodman. Shout out to Brad Goodman there as a matchmaker and everything like that, right? But you also, have the whole thing there with Jennifer Marin, right? That kind of like says that you don't necessarily have Top Rank or whatever it is that's 100%, doing the joint there for these fight cards, these events, or in comparison to like when it was on ESPN. You know what I mean? That is kind of different. Okay. So I'll give you another example of it, right? On November 15th, you had Rafael Espinoza as a WBO featherweight champion having his title defense against Arnold Kagai. You did see a number of fighters that were under Top Rank that are on that fight card too. Okay. And it's shown right here. But you do see Bob Arum there, but you also see Fernando Beltran. So that kind of like shows like, okay, yeah, it's not necessarily Top Rank that's 100% involved with it. You also have these other promoters that are like, say, like for example, those are the promoters that could put in the money for the fight card to happen at those particular venues. You know, so if they're the ones putting the money up, then they kind of like have it to where, hey, we make this happen. It's gonna be over in this particular venue. We're the ones that's putting it up, so we make this happen, right? So that's kind of like how things are going when you don't have these top ranked fighters that are part of like the ring events or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? Like in what was it, in ring 6, you have Bruce Carrington that was there involved in the ring 6, but he's on the top rank, right? So there you go. And but outside of that, they're gonna have their fighters involved in other fight cards. I mentioned this earlier, like in other podcasts, when you had what was going on with Ray Murataya against Andy Cruz. That was under Matchroom Boxing, but that was mainly because Matchroom Boxing was the one that won that purse bid between Ray Murataya and Andy Cruz, right? You're gonna have another example of that, of where you have the unification bout that's gonna be taking place there between what is it? Emmanuel Navarrete and Eduardo Sugar Nunez, right? That's going to be there. That's going to be February 28th in Glendale, Arizona. That's for Matchroom. So we don't necessarily have like Top Rank that has anything in place right now to where they have a network deal. So a number of these fight cards or a number of these fights either are going to be on the Zone or, you know, as you say, on Top Rank Classics network on Tubi or whatever it is. You know, is it bad that they show it there? At least for me, not necessarily, because it's free 99 for a lot of people, as long as you have like Roku or, you know, one of those Amazon Fire Sticks or whatever. But at the same token, you don't necessarily get you know, on the side of the fighters, you're not gonna get the amount of money that you probably would have gotten if it's, you know, on the Zone, on a ESPN, on a Fox Sports, or potentially on a Netflix. So there's a pro and a con to that, you know. So hopefully I was able to like kind of, you know, answer your question on that, because, you know, it's a, you know, pretty, you know, complex. It kind of like gets like a complex answer there on that front. So, you know, you do have that on this thing, right? So that's, like I said, that's what I mainly got for y'all here in this edition of the Boxing Source podcast. It's out to everyone again that's been able to listen live. If you're, you know, there on YouTube, hit the like button to support. Hit the share button there. You know, like I said, I'll be able to get this in like MP3 form or whatever it is, so it could be shared on Spotify. Y'all be sure to check out a number of the interviews that I have had on here, you know, over the past, you know, few weeks or whatever it is, right? So that is, you know, what we got. Like, again, trying to see if we get secure some more interviews here for this week, leading into, you know, the big fight weekend here. I'm planning on being at one of the events here within the area that I'm at for February 21st. So as far as like, you know, live coverage for, you know, the Barrios Garcia fight card, yeah, unlikely that I'm gonna be doing that. You know what I'm saying? Because I'll be there at the fights. You know, like I said, you know, for me, I support local boxing as much as I possibly can. Yes, there's gonna be 2 fight cards going on at the same time within the area on February 21st, so that's gonna be interesting. But also, I'm gonna see if I could find out if I could get another interview on Monday or Tuesday when it comes to one of these fight cards that's in the area. So I'm going to see if I could do that here. But that's what I have for y'all. Again, thank y'all for taking the time to listen here to the Boxing Source podcast. And until next time, I'll catch y'all later. Peace out.